So, hello everybody. Hello Scott. Do I have slides? There you go. So, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak here. My name is Tasso. I work for castLabs. We do various things, including players, and that's my field of work. So I lead the team that does the player implementation, and I would like the opportunity here to basically guide you guys through the things that we do on our player, and then focus on server guided ad insertion as one of the next things that we're trying to do for advertisement experiences conceptually. So a bit of background in terms of what we do on the team. And within the company, we have cross-platform players. We support Android, iOS, web, smart TVs, PlayStation, embedded Linux devices, all sorts of things. And we also do a lot of work around content security. So we have a multi-DRM backend system called DRM Today that our customers use to do license deliveries, and we also do conditional access through Wideband CAS. Besides this, we do some custom development as well for our customers to bring our solution into their platforms wherever that is needed. So on the player side, obviously, it's a full-featured player. We do all sorts of things that are needed for a professional environment. So we do thumbnails, VOD, live, obviously a lot of content security, multi-key playback, with a strong focus on making sure that we have a good user experience, content keeps on playing, and that's a smooth playback. One of the areas that we support for a while and are investing right now into understanding sort of what is the next generation of player technology that we can implement is advertisement. So what we do for a couple of years already is basically support client-side ad insertion. Then the industry moved away a little bit from client-side into server-side ad insertion. And now the new kid on the block is basically server-guided ad insertion. And that's what I'm trying to focus on in this presentation, just to give you not only a little bit of a view on what we do on the player side and how we implemented it, but also just look at the technology itself and how it works to sort of broaden the knowledge around it, so that there's just some awareness that we want to try to create around this. So this is probably the slide that I'm going to stay on for the most of the presentation. So server guided ad insertion conceptually basically sits in the middle between client side and server side. So if you think about client side, where the client reaches out to some platform, gets an ad response, typically a VAST file that contains some arbitrary piece of advertisement content, which is again typically just played out in a secondary player. So it's an overlay player. You play that, and whenever you're done with this, you go back to the main experience. Various things go wrong, and on a lot of platforms, dual player approaches just simply don't work. So for instance, on modern smart TVs, you can only do one single video decoder at a time. So running two video players at a time is just physically not possible on those platforms. And it comes with a lot of other sort of downsides. So it's easy to block, and the user experience, generally speaking, is questionable, not to offend too many people who still do client-side ad insertion. The next evolution of that was to basically go all the way to the other extreme and do everything server-side. So now the ad requests are triggered by the server. They go to the ad platforms, get their VAST response, and do one crucial thing there, which will stick to, is they condition the content. So they tag the advertisement and they transcode it and make sure that it's in alignment with the main content so that it can easily be played out. There was a necessity because server-side ad insertion basically means that the advertisement is spliced into the main content, which means that from a player's and also from a user's perspective, it's just one stream of media that gets played out from zero to the end. This works for live, this works for VOD assets, but it also involves quite a bit of effort on the server side, because now you need to not only condition the content, which is beneficial, but you also need to bring it into the respective playlist. So an HLS playlist or an MPEG-Dash manifest. So the idea that was sort of brought up was, how can we combine the benefits of client-side ad insertion, where we get triggers directly from the end user's device, with what server-side ad insertion provides us with respect to content preparation and play-out experience for on the end user's device, basically. So this is where server-guided ad insertion comes in. I have a separate slide with literally 2 bullet points later just to emphasize this. This is part of public specifications. This is in HLS already for quite some time in HLS, called an HLS interstitial. And this is coming to MPEG- as well with MPEG-6 edition, which is hopefully coming out to the public in June. That's the plan. It's open for comments right now. So there are 2 more MPEG meetings scheduled before that spec will go live. And that contains a thing that's called MPD insert events. And that's the sort of corresponding counterpart in MPEG- to do the same thing that's happening with interstitials. So how does it work, and what's the benefit, and how can you integrate this with player technology? So you still need a lot of technology and components that you have for server-side ad insertion. Specifically, as I said before, you still want to condition your content. The expectation for the player is still to get a piece of content that is the same codec, the same profile as the main content, because this allows me to put this into a unique timeline, use one decoder, and basically do a smooth play out throughout the entire asset, going from main content into advertisement and back out of advertisement. However, the main difference is that what gets put into the playlist, into the manifest, is no longer the advertisement content. It's an event, it's a pointer that points to a different playlist, a different piece of content. It's conditioned, it fits perfectly into that main asset, but it sits somewhere else, which means that from the player's perspective, it sees the main content and it can just play through that. And if there would be an issue with advertisement or you want to turn it off, it's just there's nothing to worry about from the player's perspective. The player can linearly play through the content and everything will just work. At the same time, if the ads are spliced in, are available, now you give a lot of control to the client, because the client interprets the event, and only when it's about to play an advertisement, it's going to go to the, what I called here, the ad server. Obviously, that bubble is significantly more complex in the real world, but just think about it as like a backend component that you go to request your advertisement. In most of the cases, in case of an HLS interstitial, that would return an M3U8 playlist that literally contains your main content. And that's then delivered to the client, and the client takes care of splicing this in. In terms of client-side technology, there are basically 2 ways that still are possible to implement this. On platforms where you can do multiple decodes, you can implement this with a dual-player approach. So you completely open up a secondary player, put it up front. Once it's loaded, play the advertisement, then hide it again, go back to your main content. But because the content is conditioned, you can use the conditioned content and splice it into your timeline and then achieve basically the same effect that you would get from server-side ad insertion, with the sole difference that the splicing is happening on the client. But the playout experience is exactly the same, right? So I have one decoder, I play through my content, I go into my advertisement, it's clearly marked as advertisement, and I can handle it the same way as I would handle it for server-side, but I can trigger the ad just on demand, which, if you think about it, also brings a lot of new possible implementations to life, because one of the issues that you have with live streaming and advertisement is you would like to offer a large DVR window, right? So let's say 4 hours or 8 hours of DVR window. But since most of your users are playing on the live edge, you not necessarily want to populate this with advertisement, because that would be wasteful, and your ad provider would start screaming at you because you are requesting ads for 8 hours of content where you have a 5% chance of any of those ads ever being played, because that would require the user to actually go back in time and leverage that window, right? So that's something that you don't want to do. With server-guided ad insertion, you no longer have that problem, because what you splice in is an event, and only upon execution of that event, the actual ad bidding process happens in the background. So that problem goes away. The origin server, the manifest manipulator, still does its thing. You splice in all the events, but the actual trigger is based until the actual ad playback is about to start. So it's up to the player to decide when to request the ad. And like on a typical implementation, that's how we do it on our player. It's basically when I need to fill my buffer with that advertisement, that's when I'm going to request it. So if I have, let's say, a 30-second buffer and it freed up, I would do the ad request 25 seconds before the actual playback, which increases the chances significantly for that playback to actually go into that advertisement and play it out. It also brings more benefits beyond this. So things that you can obviously also do with other technologies like client-side or server-side, but the specifications both on HLS and Dash allow you to do both replacement as well as inserts, which means that for a live stream that comes out of a broadcast feed that already has advertisements and you want to replace those, you can do this with SGAI, with HLS Interstitials or the aforementioned MPD insert events. So basically, you tell the player, here's the advertisement, start playing at this time point, and continue the live feed when the advertisement is done, where you left off, plus the duration of the advertisement. So meaning you stay on the live edge, you go not back where you left off, but to where you are in terms of lifetime, and then you continue your placement, your main content from there, which effectively means you replaced the main content that was there in that time frame during that period. You replaced it with whatever content you had in the interstitial. And similarly for VOD, or typically I would say for an AVOD use case, for a VOD use case, you don't want that, right? You don't want to cut away half of the movie with advertisements. People still want to watch that. So what you can do is basically you do an insert. So you go out to your advertisement and you tell the player to go back where it left off, basically, when the advertisement is played out. And this is the sort of one of the fundamental concepts on how interstitials in HLS case and also MPD insert events are designed. So these use cases are possible to implement, and a lot of the logic is still left to the client side. And this brings more benefits now, because now in contrast to server side, where obviously I can still do this on a technical level, but it makes it significantly easier for the client to also implement more business logic around this. So what if I want to make sure that if the user seeks, he sees the last advertisement prior to his seek point and then goes back where he left off? I can easily implement this with standards compliance, HLS interstitials or MPD inserts. And in fact, the Dash variant is, let's say, even more flexible there because it's rather explicit in how this should be handled. In a server-side use case, I would need to really sort of implement this custom and proprietary in my player. And this is important because to some extent, you want to be agnostic to your player, right? You might need to deploy to platforms where you have no control over your player, right? So you might want to deploy to Roku. So somebody needs to tell Roku how to do this, right? What's the expectation? And this is the benefit of having this in specifications like MPEG Dash and HLS, because now player side can actually just implement that specification, and you get like a baseline implementation of it, right? You can still, where you have the control, you can add additional features to it, but at least where on platforms where you don't have the control, you get a baseline implementation that is given to you by the spec. So looking at some of the benefits that I already just mentioned, just to repeat this. So it's basically no longer manipulating the primary timeline on origin. You just get these event dashes that are then interpreted by the player. This obviously works for pre-rolls and mid-rolls, so you can be very flexible in how and when you want to schedule them. And because they are just events and they are time-based, it carries one significant benefit, which is you can schedule stuff that will happen in the future, which is something that with a live stream, with server-side ad insertion, you can't do, because the manifest will only expose things that are currently available. And so if you have an advertisement coming up in 10 seconds with an SGAI event, you can announce it now in your manifest, and the player can now start loading the advertisement, because the ad, the interstitial, the MPD insert effectively is just a static asset. It's a VOD asset, and it's explicitly provided to the player as a VOD asset. So the player can then do everything it does on typical static content, which means I can fill my buffer with it. I can just load as much of it as I want, and I can start loading it whenever I want. And it's not live anymore to me, right? Which has benefits on the client side implementation and the player. And then another huge benefit that comes out of this is, because of the way this is designed in spec, everything you deal with, so your main content as well as your advertisement, is fully cacheable on CDN. You can implement it so that it's not, but you can also implement it so that it is. because both of those specs allow you to dynamically change the URLs, append headers, or append query parameters, which means that you can have static URLs and still be able to identify your users and point them in different locations, or point them, like, handle the tracking events so that you can identify who was watching what and where. But your main content and your ad content can reside on your CDN, and it's fully cacheable, and you don't need a version per user, which especially for a live scenario is tremendously beneficial. And this is something that you simply can't do with just standard server-side ad insertion. And again, you're just combining the best of both worlds, because a lot of the machinery that you need to do this with SGAI, you still need, because you want conditioned ads, as I said before, right? So you literally just, instead of splicing it straight into the manifest, you splice it into an event and put it into a separate playlist or a separate manifest in that sense. So just to give you the bigger picture, this is the part where we are involved. So we are building an SDK to do ad tracking. We have our players. We're integrating MPEG- insert events. That's also HLS interstitials. I'll have the booth number later. We have demos for that at the booth. So feel free to pop by and take a look at that, and we have a further discussion. The whole concept fits rather perfectly into the ad ecosystem that exists today, right? So not a lot of things need to change. It's a matter of the ad platform to adopt to this and the manifest manipulator to operate slightly differently. Otherwise, everything more or less stays the same. As I said, I have the slide with the 2 bullet points, but it's very important. HLS interstitials support this, so it's in the HLS spec for quite some time, and MPEG-6 edition is coming out this summer, and it has the counterpart that still evolves a little bit, but we'll have it finalized by the summer, and it will allow you to do the same thing that's already in the HLS specification. I mentioned most of those things. So obviously the core benefits are you can reduce manifest size, make things cacheable, improve the user experience, combine the best of both worlds, looking at client-side and server-side ad insertion, and basically position yourself right in the middle. One more thing that I didn't mention before is, but it also allows you to implement new advanced use cases. So if you want to see a demo of this, we have a demo where we combine interstitials with SIMIT nonlinear advertisements so that you can do squeeze bags, L banner shapes, pause ads, and you can use the same mechanism to deliver this information into the client and build extended user experience on your target platforms. In the interest of time, so I'm going to skip this one. So what's important to know is that this brings a lot of benefits for your platform. And what we are trying to do on the player side in terms of our product is to basically help you implement this, streamline the process, and make it easy for you to adopt these new workflows, because we will take care of the player side and make sure that the playback is smooth, buffering is working as it's supposed to, and we can create a good user experience, while at the same time make sure that we leave all the business logic and the logic you want to have for your application to you and in your application, and we just deal with the video streaming components of your platform. Thank you very much. Feel free to visit us at 2312. It's just down here the hall. We have demos for everything I was just mentioning, and I'm happy to talk more about that there. Thank you.